Good evening. My name is David. I'll be sharing with you a little bit about Apple and their organizational behavior this evening, just to kind of go over really who they are, where they started, where they stand today, and really what makes them who they are, what makes Apple Apple, and why have they been so successful. So let's dive into that a little bit here and kind of go over those. So first, I'd like to start with a brief history of Apple to kind of give you perspective on where they started and how they came to be and who they are today. So looking at this quote here, we see to make a contribution to the world by making tools for the mind that advance humankind. Now, this was coined by Steve Jobs back in 1980 when the company was originally, it was actually started in 1976. But this was originally kind of the first push that Steve Jobs made as a growing and thriving company. This was actually their very first mission statement. And this really would become the foundation from which Apple would build its legacy upon. So let's dive into that history a little bit here. As I said, founded in 1976. It was actually started by Steve Jobs and his friend Steve Wozniak. Steve Wozniak was actually the computer builder. Steve Jobs, although very adept at building computers and technology at that time and going forward, he was more of the charismatic one. And we're going to go into a little bit of how that worked, how that relationship worked for those two. So in order to start this company, they had a good base and some good ideas, but they needed startups. So they actually ended up selling, Steve Jobs sold his car, and Steve Wozniak sold quite a few valuables of his as well, including a programmable calculator, is I believe the correct term. At that time, that was a big deal for them. That was a nice piece of technology. So they used that startup money to invest in their company. And less than a year later, they were able to develop a computer with the first color display, which was a big deal at that time, as well as a plastic casing. It was a custom plastic casing. Now that custom plastic casing, one, made it lighter than any of the other metal computers at that time. So that made it far more appealing to the average consumer. In addition, there was a color screen, which also made it more appealing to the eye. So now it wasn't necessarily just a matter of necessity, it was a matter of want. And that was beginning to pave the way for what Apple would become. Next, Steve Jobs realized they had a wonderful product. However, it doesn't sell itself. You need to really get your company name out there and really get investors behind you to push that and really develop that into something great. Steve Jobs really realized that. He collected two very key individuals in this happening here. One was Regis McKenna. He was a PR businessman at the time. He propelled Apple forward and agreed to represent them publicly and really develop their name. The second individual, who was the money behind this, was Michael Markkula. And he essentially was a big businessman and leader at Intel. And with his backing, they were able to really push their company forward. Now, in return for the backing, Michael actually wanted a large piece of Apple, and he eventually became a board member and really helped Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak steer the company in the direction it was going as well. So he also had a key hand in that. Now, fast forward to 1979, the first floppy disk was actually created by Steve, and this really opened up a lot of doors for them because it really allowed consumers to move and switch and share data at a much faster rate, and that helped Apple dive into business and consumer avenues. Now, looking down the line a little bit here toward the 90s, their consumer audience has grown exponentially, and it's not saturated, but they're known. Their presence is very known within the consumer markets. Now they're looking to penetrate something big. What's the next big thing? Steve sees this, and he sees it as education, because this is a huge market that's remained untapped to them up until now. And he realizes that there's certain key players in there that actually own that market. So what he does is he develops a plan to really get in there and sway the teachers. So he uses discounts and he uses donations in the name of education. And this, again, builds a culture, a reason why around the product. And we're going to get into that a little bit later and why that's important. He didn't just sell the product, he sold the why. And that is exponentially important to Apple's success. So moving down the line a little bit, from the time that they started in 1976 to the beginning of the new millennium, 2000, they are now making, at that time, $8 billion gross income and $786 million net. Over the course of 24 years, Steve Jobs and Apple have built an empire. Relatively small comparatively to today, that was a big deal then, and still would be considered a big deal today. So that kind of gives you a crash course on the history of Apple and kind of how they've used that same progression to really move forward and really become something great as the years have gone on. So with that being said, let's take a look at their product's evolution here. They started at the very beginning with their color computers and their prototypes. And as you can see throughout the years until present day, they've really diversified. And they offer predominantly business and consumer solutions for computers. And it's really the realm that they've stuck with. And they haven't really strayed outside of that too much. But they're also very skilled at satisfying that niche. So they do a very good job with that market share. And they have everything from laptops, their MacBook line, to their flagship iPhones, to Apple Watches for working out and telling time. Really, there's a product to meet just about every need that a consumer may have. And that just gives you an overview of kind of what Apple sells current day. Now, diving into the core competencies here, we're looking at what does the company value? What do they put time into? What do they really put their energy into developing within their organization? Now, Apple is very unlike many of its competitors. And the reason being is because, as I said before, they focus on their why. They focus on why they do what they do versus just the product. And they do what they do for people, to make people's lives better. That is their goal. And that was stated by Steve Jobs time and time again. Providing a great product is just the residual of trying to satisfy existing human needs, to make people's lives better, easier, and more efficient. Now, that same philosophy really bleeds over into every aspect of what they do, not necessarily just the relationships between their customers, but also their employees. Apple breathes an environment of innovation, creativity, open diversity, and in discipline. Ultimately, they strive for 100% every single time. Now, what makes them different is Apple is a very open concept. They're not traditionally hierarchical. They don't believe in having closed doors and keeping employees in the dark. In fact, their new facility actually exemplifies a lot of their core competencies quite well. It's very open, and they encourage their employees and other teams to mix with other departments and other individuals who work there in order to synergize and really collaborate to meet different goals for different departments, as well as share ideas that could potentially be used within the company and even their product lines. Now, this open door policy extends from the CEOs all the way down to the graphic designers and every employee within the organization. And what this does is it builds trust. There's collaboration, there's synergy, there's trust, there's a build of relationship between the employees, the coworkers, the subordinates, the superiors, and they can all work together in order to meet a common goal. And what this does is trust, relationships, efficiency, loyalty, and hard work are the fruition of this action, if done correctly, which Apple does. And people feel valued. And this ultimately is far more efficient. The democratic form of leadership is far more efficient in this way than any sort of traditional hierarchical leadership organizational setup, because it makes employees want to do better and it makes them feel valued. And that is crucial. And then every other talent within the organization that Apple could use, whether it's interpersonal skills, marketing, innovation, software, Apple caters to these using the cohorts for hands-on. They use training sessions, and they make sure that all of these follow the same model that their company follows, which is the open model, which we just explained. So they're very, very forward thinking. And if you're looking at potentially copying this or learning from this, this would be one of the main things that I would glean, because it has a huge, huge effect on why Apple has been so successful. Now let's look at Apple and its employees here, and how they relate to Apple's customers. Most companies that you see today want to push products, and they encourage their employees to sell products in order to increase the company's bottom line. However, this is not how Apple does it. The reason is very simple. Apple, as we said before, focuses on people. This doesn't stop at their organization or within their organization. It extends out into the world of their patrons. Now, Apple actually follows a very straightforward and very simple training program when training their employees, new or existing, and it's actually short. The acronym is Apple. Essentially, what that stands for is employees talk to patrons, they greet them warmly, they sympathize with them, they listen to their needs, they offer a solution to meet their needs, and they address any sort of concerns that the customer might have. And then following the transaction, they wish them well, and they ask for their business. They ask for repeat business. Now, this sounds like a standard sales pitch, but the way that it's done has nothing to do with the product itself. The way that they're trained to approach their clients is through concern with the client themselves. What do they need? What are their needs? Can we meet those needs? Not necessarily what can we sell them, but do we have anything to meet their needs? And how can this make their lives better? The customers see this. They see how they're related to on an emotional level and a personal level, not just statistically, this is going to do this, this, and this for you, and they connect with that. And this ultimately creates a very loyal customer and a very loyal customer base. And this is a huge part of what Apple has done, whether through their organization or through their market share, is they've created not just a company, but a culture. And ultimately, this culture is concerned with not just the products, which they generally are very satisfied with because of the quality, but they are interested in what does the culture believe in, and it fits with their beliefs, so they connect with this. This is vital, and this is also another huge part of what has made Apple so successful. Now, moving on here, these are the individuals that have set all of this into play. This is Apple's leadership. They're the ones who have really set forward the standards that we just discussed, and really keep everything in effect. They're the reason that we have the company that we see today. And they're also the ones who are continually striving to put forth their best foot so that they can continue to be this type of culture and and leader for their company and ultimately their cultures that they've created. Now, with that being said, I personally can see where there really is quite a bit we can learn from Apple, and there really is quite a bit that we can we can take from this in terms of leadership styles, and we can see that although very unconventional, their style has been highly effective. And while there may be many companies or many leaders that would say, the Machiavellian or the traditional hierarchical approaches would be best, we can clearly see that employees respond best when they feel like they have say, what they do matters, they feel like they have value, and they should feel like they have value, and that their contributions actually mean something to the overall good of the organization. And when everybody is involved, you're engaging everybody and everyone's involved, this is ultimately going to create a completely different organizational environment that's going to generate not just results, but superior and innovative and surprisingly new and fresh results, which Apple has tapped into. So if you're really looking for something that can create a company that can just produce, certainly you can go with the traditional sense. However, if you're looking for something that can make an impact, then I would certainly look at what Apple has done and potentially try to mirror their strategy. With that being said, I would like to open the floor to questions.